we're still only using that one time point, and it's time to explore that further. So I'll start by opening the time module. The points don't have any length, but there's a loop end number of 480, which is equivalent of a quarter node. So I could move it in that quarter node interval and destroy our flow completely. I'll just take that back so we can explore what we have so far. So please bear with me. In the first step module, you see it just keeps playing that one over and over again. And in the second one, we divide it with 2, and I'll just take multiply back to 1, so you can see it keeps playing that node in between the points. But if I then added an actual point here, you see now it divides that, giving us double, and so a division of 1 will then give us exactly what we had. But with the added benefit that I can now change the timing of that point, you see now it comes early after the beat. With multiply back to 16, you see that repeats and doesn't move linearly at all anymore, affecting the graphs as well, of course. I could turn snap on to move more precisely. Put one there, and for the sake of the demo, I'll just store that as number 2. Put one on the other end, store that as number 3, and I can now morph between them. Simply like this, to create some strange, sometimes nice rhythmical variations. You can also shift click a point, by the way, to delete it. And I can punch some numbers in here also, 240 being half of 480. And with these numbers in relation with your BPM, you have the essence of time. To quote the movie Pi, the numbers are nothing, it's the syntax, what's between the numbers, meaning the relative intervals, as we will come to learn. If I made 8 16 notes like this, you'll see I'll quickly again have the steady pulse, but can then make variations inside that step module, just as with your normal step sequencer. But again with the added benefit that if I just store this one here and then offset a couple of the points, I can then have many different groove maps, so to speak. And again, like before, just morph, and only those points will then be animated. You're of course free to use it more like a normal step sequencer and not worry about time morphing or having different instruments linked to the same graph in strange ways. You could then, for example, call the first one 16th and the second one 32th and just select them as inputs for a more typical step sequencing approach. Or just as easy, you could set up something polyrhythmic, call this poly just for the example. And I'll actually just make a small example out of that. Again, I'll start with generating 8 16 notes, but then with the interval field, I'll type in 90. You can see as I change it, the numbers change, but the graph remains the same because it just shows the relation of the intervals between points. There it goes. Just take multiply 1 and clear, and there we go. Polyrhythmic. And you can see how they move independently but meet every 4 rounds as you would expect, with the relation between 90 and 120. Anyways, I'll just return to where we were and do a complete recall of all the modules. And there we are back to normal. So I'll do something more related to what we had going already, and then instead of 1 quarter note, I'll make 2 quarter notes. And I'll actually just save that as 2 quarter and number 2. And then you see, just by putting the 2 on, I now have the bass playing as before, but with 2 distinct steps. And here it ends suddenly because there's too many points, 2 times 2 times 16 being 64, but with 8 we're then also back to normal. Now we're still using a division of 2, but in a different and more interesting way, since we have 2 actual points and the divisions will end here and here, which we can then morph. I'll just make another graph with a 16 note before, like this, and then store that as number 3 and call it tweak. The division gets calculated, of course, every time you update the graph and morph between them. So the divided points that module 2 is using will then be here and here. I could, of course, set up a MIDI fader to morph between those 2 points, so I'll just go into MIDI control again. And, of course, assign the fader, and then find it on the list. Now there's all these categories that we went through, and then there's sys for system, where you find everything that doesn't have its own category, and time is here, for example. So there I'll just set up from 2 to 3, and with float, of course, to get decimal number. And now I can tweak it with the fader. And have a bit of fun with that. It's really nice to be able to rhythmically change 2 different instruments with the same time module. I could also set up a modulation graph to change that time graph. So I simply set the range also from 2 to 3 here. Set that to 20 milliseconds. And simply assign it in the mod module, like we did in MIDI control with the sys category and the time 1 preset. Float on and graph on. And then just draw from one end to the other, from 2, and then climb to 3. And there we have it. You see it moving smoothly. So that could be useful. I'm not gonna keep that though, I'm just gonna clear it again and also just recall the preset to remove that. What I am going to do is this multiply factor we've been playing around with. That's a lot of fun in itself. You can see you can actually use that to play with. So why not set up a MIDI controller to change that? I'll just punch in the number directly instead of MIDI learn, since it's easy. And step 2, and here you find multiply. So I set that from 1 to 8, where we had it before. And now we can play with that. So we basically just have a fader that lets us jam with how much of the sweep to use. Which of course, together with our other faders, opens up some interesting possibilities. I'll just keep it really short here since it's already a long tutorial, but I will expand on this in the next tutorial where I will also introduce the teleportation system. So store all and save.